The sixth meeting looked exactly like the first 5. Same room. Same table. Same configuration of Heron representatives sitting across from Greg with the particular arrangement of composed disinterest that he had come to recognize over 3 years as their default setting for these conversations. Not hostile. Not engaged. Just present in the way that someone was present when they had decided before walking in that nothing said in the room was going to change anything they were planning to do. Greg had been an ambassador for 20 years. He had sat across from difficult counterparts before. Species that communicated in ways that took months to learn. Civilizations with value systems so different from Earth's that finding common ground required dismantling your own assumptions before you could even start building toward theirs. He had done all of that. Patiently. Methodically. With the specific kind of sustained effort that the job required from people who were good at it and understood what it was for. 20 years. He had never delivered the same warning 6 times to the same party. The Heron Collective had been expanding into the outer systems for 4 years. Not aggressively in the way that word usually implied. Not with visible conflict or open warfare or anything that showed up dramatically on monitoring feeds. It was quieter than that. They moved into a system, established a presence, and the civilizations already living there found themselves with less access to resources, less freedom of movement, and eventually less reason to stay. Some left voluntarily. Some were encouraged to leave through methods that stopped just short of anything the Galactic Council's existing frameworks clearly prohibited. That last part was deliberate. Greg had understood that from the first meeting. The Heron weren't operating carelessly. They were operating carefully, precisely at the edge of what could be formally objected to, close enough to the line that every objection required lengthy debate about whether the line had actually been crossed. By the time the debate concluded, the situation on the ground had usually moved forward anyway. It was effective. Greg could acknowledge that privately without admiring it. What it was not was something humanity was prepared to keep watching indefinitely. The first meeting had been formal and thorough. Greg had laid out Earth's position clearly. The outer systems contained civilizations under Earth's informal protection. Civilizations that had neither the capacity nor the standing to represent themselves at the council level, and humanity considered their displacement a matter it took seriously. He had presented documentation. He had outlined the specific systems in question. He had been precise about what Earth was asking the Heron to stop doing and why. The Heron lead representative had listened to all of it. Had asked 3 clarifying questions. Had said that the collective would take Earth's position under consideration. Then they had kept doing exactly what they were doing. The second meeting, Greg had presented updated documentation showing continued displacement activity in 2 additional systems. He had been less formal and more direct. The message was the same, but the framing was clearer. Earth was not raising this as a theoretical concern. It was raising it as a problem that needed to stop. The Heron had taken that under consideration too. Meetings 3 and 4 followed the same pattern with declining amounts of diplomatic cushioning around the core message. By the 5th meeting, Greg was delivering what was functionally an ultimatum wrapped in just enough formal language to remain within diplomatic convention. His counterpart across the table had received it with the same composed disinterest as always and said the collective valued its relationship with Earth and would continue to consider the concerns raised. Greg had driven back to Earth's diplomatic station after the 5th meeting and sat in his office for a while without doing anything. Just sitting. Thinking about 20 years of work and what it had taught him and whether there was a version of a 6th meeting that would produce a different result than the previous 5. He had concluded, after a while, that the answer to that question depended entirely on what the 6th meeting was for. He requested the 6th meeting himself. That was unusual. The previous 5 had been requested through formal council channels with the standard notification periods. This one Greg requested directly, through a back channel that bypassed the usual scheduling process, with a timeframe of 48 hours. The Heron agreed to the timeline without pushing back, which told Greg they were curious. Curious was useful. He prepared for the 6th meeting differently than the previous 5. He didn't update the documentation. Didn't prepare new materials. Didn't build a presentation or organize his notes into the structured format he normally used. He took his folder, the same one he had carried into all 5 previous meetings, and he put in it the 1-page summary he had written at the end of the 5th meeting and hadn't shown anyone yet. His assistant asked him the morning of the 6th meeting if he needed anything prepared. Greg said no. He had everything he needed. He sat down across from the same Heron representatives in the same room and looked at them for a moment before opening his folder. They looked back with the same composed disinterest, already waiting for the version of the message they had heard 5 times before so they could receive it the same way they had received it 5 times before. Greg opened his folder. looked at his one-page summary, then closed it. He didn't need it. He knew what he was going to say. He told them what had happened in every system they had moved into over the past 4 years. Not as documentation. As a list, spoken plainly, one system after another, the names of the civilizations that had been displaced and where they had gone and what they had left behind. He went through all of it without referring to any notes and without any of the formal diplomatic framing that had surrounded every previous conversation. Then he stopped. Looked at his counterpart directly. "I have said the same thing to you 6 times, he said. "In different rooms and different formats with different levels of formality. The message has been the same every time. You have acknowledged it every time. And every time nothing changed." His counterpart began the familiar opening of a response. Greg continued. "I am not here today to say it a 7th time, he said. "I am here to tell you that this is the 6th time. And that there will not be a 7th. He paused. Long enough to make sure the pause was felt. "What happens after this meeting is no longer something I will be involved in. That is not a threat. It is just accurate." He stood up, closed his folder, picked it up, and said in the same calm voice he had used for 20 years of diplomacy, "This is the last time I will say this." Then he walked out. His counterpart said nothing. For the first time in 6 meetings the composed disinterest was gone. In its place was something Greg hadn't seen from them before. Uncertainty. He walked to his vehicle and drove back to the station and wrote his report and went to bed at a reasonable hour and slept without difficulty. He had said what needed saying. What came next was someone else's job. The Mira system was the kind of place that didn't make it onto many maps. Not because it was hidden or strategically insignificant in any dramatic sense. Just because it was quiet. A mid-sized star, 4 planets, one of them inhabited by a civilization that had been living there for about 300 years without bothering anyone or being bothered by anyone in return. They had not yet developed spaceflight. They had no standing in the Galactic Council. They had no fleet, no diplomatic representatives, no formal agreements with any spacefaring civilization except one, a protection claim filed by Earth 7 years ago that existed in the Council's records as a single line of text that most people who had ever seen it had not thought about particularly hard. Tuesday morning, Mira system time, 30 Heron vessels dropped out of jump space at the outer edge of the system and began moving inward. Lieutenant Kay Brooks was 3 hours into her patrol shift when the contacts appeared on her scanner. She was alone. That was standard for this route, a single patrol vessel running a circuit through a cluster of quiet outer systems, checking in, logging, moving on. The kind of assignment that existed because Earth believed in being present in the places it had claimed responsibility for even when nothing was happening there. Especially when nothing was happening there. Kay had been doing this rotation for 4 months. She knew these systems. She knew Mira. She looked at her scanner. Counted the contacts. Counted them again. 30 vessels. Heron configuration. She had the recognition profiles loaded and the match came back clean on the first pass. Moving inward at a steady pace with no identification broadcast on any standard frequency and no contact request sent to the system's inhabited planet below. Kay sat with that for about 15 seconds. 30 ships. One of hers. She thought about the math of that the way she thought about most things, directly, without spending too much time on the parts she couldn't change. She couldn't change the 30 ships. She couldn't change being alone. What she could change was what she did next. She moved her ship. She positioned herself between the Heron formation and the planet with the calm efficiency of someone who had run this scenario in training enough times that the physical execution of it didn't require much conscious thought. The thinking part was already done. The training had done it. Her hands just followed what her training had built. She opened a channel on the standard contact frequency. Identified her vessel, her rank, her affiliation. Then she stated Earth's protection claim over the Mira system clearly and completely, the same way it was written in the Council's records, without editorial or emphasis. Just the claim, on record, on a logged frequency, at a timestamp that would exist in the official record regardless of what happened next. Then she waited. The response came back in 4 minutes. The Heron commander's voice was measured. Professional. Carrying the specific quality of someone who had expected this to be uncomplicated and was mildly inconvenienced by the development but not concerned. He told her to move her vessel out of the formation's path. Kay said no. There was a pause. Slightly longer than the previous one. The commander came back with a version of the same instruction dressed in more formal language. He referenced the Heron Collective's recognized rights of transit through uncontrolled space. He noted that a single Earth patrol vessel did not constitute a significant military presence. He said the word move again at the end, still measured, still professional, but with something underneath it now that hadn't been there the first time. Kay listened to all of it. Then she said no again in the same tone she had used the first time. Not aggressive. Not shaking. Just clear and steady and entirely committed to the position she was holding. She was aware of the 30 ships on her scanner the whole time. She was not unaware of what 30 ships could do to one. She had done that math already and set it aside because the math wasn't the point. The point was the planet behind her and the 300 years of people living on it who had woken up on a Tuesday morning with no idea that 30 vessels were currently moving through their outer system. They didn't have anyone else. Right now, in this moment, they had Kay. That was enough of a reason. She sent the transmission to Earth Command while the channel with the Heron Commander was still open. She kept it short because short was accurate and accuracy was what the moment required. She gave her position, the contact count, the identification confirmation, and the current status. Then she ended it with 4 words that she typed without hesitating because they were simply the truth of what had happened. They crossed the line. She sent it. Noted the timestamp. Went back to watching her scanner. The Heron formation had slowed. Not stopped, slowed. The commander came back on the channel a 3rd time and the measured professional quality was still there, but it was working harder now to cover something underneath it that Kay recognized as the early stage of a recalculation. He had expected a single patrol vessel to move when instructed. A single patrol vessel that did not move when instructed was a different variable than the one he had planned for. Kay understood this. She also understood that a recalculation on his end bought time, and time was the only resource she had in meaningful quantity right now. She kept the channel open. Kept her position. Kept her voice level every time she spoke and kept her answer the same every time he asked. No. Just that. One word. Repeated as many times as necessary with the same weight behind it each time. Outside her viewport the planet turned slowly in the dark. Quiet. Unhurried. Completely unaware of the conversation happening in the space above it. Kay watched her scanner and waited and held the line. Tom Wade read Kay's transmission at 0614. He was already at his desk. He was always at his desk before 0600. Not because anyone required it, but because the kind of work that happened in Earth Command's Deep Response Division had a way of not respecting the difference between working hours and everything else, and Tom had long ago stopped trying to maintain a boundary that the job kept crossing anyway. He came in early. He stayed late. He drank too much coffee and slept enough to function and got on with it. He read the 4 words twice. Then he set his cup down very carefully and looked at the wall across from his desk for a moment. Not long. Maybe 10 seconds. Long enough to let what he had just read settle from information into understanding. Long enough to make sure he wasn't about to make a decision of this size in the first 30 seconds of processing it. 10 seconds. Then he picked up his radio. "Get me the current position of the Mira patrol vessel," he said. "And pull up the Heron contact logs from the last 6 hours." The Deep Response Division occupied 3 floors of Earth Command's main facility and employed people who were selected for a specific combination of qualities that took years to identify reliably in candidates. Technical competence was necessary but not sufficient. Calm under pressure was necessary but not sufficient. What the division actually required, what made someone useful in this specific room doing this specific work, was the ability to hold very large and very serious things in mind without those things causing the kind of reaction that made decisions worse. Tom had been running the division for 8 years. He had selected most of his current staff himself. He trusted them the way you trusted people who had proven over time that they understood what the work was and what it required. He walked out of his office and into the main floor, and the room adjusted to his presence in the quiet way it always did, not snapping to attention, not making a production of it, just a slight collective shift in awareness that he had come out and that meant something was happening. "Mirror system," he said to the room. "I need the full picture. Everything from the first Heron contact to right now." The room got to work. While his team assembled the picture, Tom walked to the window at the far end of the floor. It looked out over nothing interesting. A maintenance yard, some parked vehicles, the kind of view that existed in most working buildings and served no purpose beyond giving people somewhere to look that wasn't a screen. Tom looked at it anyway. He thought about Greg Hall. About 6 meetings over 3 years. About 20 years of diplomatic work carried out by a man who was genuinely good at it and had delivered the same warning 6 times with the same patience and the same clarity and had been heard and acknowledged and ignored every single time. He thought about Kay Brooks. 1 ship. 30 contacts. Holding position between a Heron fleet and a planet full of people who didn't know she was there. He thought about the authorization card in his desk drawer. It had been there for 3 years. Put there after the second Heron meeting when Tom had looked at the trajectory of the situation and made a private assessment about where it was going and what would eventually be required. He had prepared for it the way he prepared for most things, methodically, without drama, making sure the preparation was complete before it was needed so that when it was needed the preparation didn't have to happen in a hurry. He had hoped not to use it. He walked back to his desk. His senior analyst, a steady and thorough woman named Dr. Liz Cole, who had been in the division longer than Tom had and communicated in the precise, efficient language of someone who respected other people's time, brought him the assembled picture in 7 minutes. 30 Heron vessels. Confirmed configuration. Moving inward through the Mira system on a trajectory consistent with an approach to the inhabited planet. K's vessel in position between the formation and the planet. Channel open. 3 exchanges on record. K's position unchanged. Liz set the report on his desk. Looked at him. Said nothing extra because nothing extra was needed. Tom looked at the report. Looked at the timestamp on K's transmission. Calculated roughly how long she had been holding that position alone and how long she could continue holding it before the Heron commander's recalculation produced a decision that made K's position untenable. He opened his desk drawer. The authorization card was exactly where he had put it 3 years ago. Small. Unremarkable looking. The kind of object that gave no indication from its appearance of what using it actually meant. Tom picked it up. Held it for a moment. He was not a person who made decisions like this without being certain. He had been certain for about 3 years that this day was coming. 6 meetings had not changed the Heron's direction. 32 months of patient, clear, consistent diplomacy from one of Earth's best ambassadors had not changed it. The only thing that had changed over 3 years was the number of outer system civilizations that had been displaced and the increasingly clear picture of a collective that had correctly identified human patience as something it could continue operating inside of indefinitely. Until it couldn't. Tom held the authorization card to the reader on his desk. The system registered it. A single confirmation tone. Low and brief. The kind of sound that was deliberately understated because the people who designed the system understood that the moments requiring its use were not moments that benefited from drama. Tom set the card down. Picked up his radio. Deep response, he said. Authorization confirmed. Mira system. Full deployment. He paused for exactly 1 second. Tell them K. Brooks is holding position. They are to reach her before the situation changes. The room moved. Not loudly. Not with the kind of urgent scrambling that looked like action in films and felt like chaos in real operations. Just the quiet, purposeful movement of people who had prepared for this and knew exactly what came next and were doing it. Tom looked at the 4 words still open on his screen. They crossed the line. He thought about Greg Hall driving back from the 6th meeting and filing his report and going to bed. He thought about what Greg had said walking out of that room. The last time. Tom closed the transmission log. Opened the deployment tracking feed. And watched the pieces start moving. The 40 minutes passed the way certain kinds of time passed, slowly on the surface and fast underneath. Kay held her position. That was the whole job for those 40 minutes and she did it the way she did everything, without wasted motion, without unnecessary noise, with the specific focused calm that her training had built into her over years of work that had prepared her for exactly this kind of moment even when no specific briefing had told her this specific moment was coming. The Heron commander came back on the channel 4 more times in those 40 minutes. Each time the message was a variation of the same instruction and each time Kay's response was a variation of the same answer. The variations were small. The substance was identical. He told her to move. She said no. He reframed it. She said no. He added context about the collective's recognized rights and the formal standing of the transit and the absence of any binding council restriction on their movement through this system. Kay listened to all of it. Then she said no again. She was not rude. She was not aggressive. She did not add anything beyond the refusal because nothing beyond the refusal was needed and adding things that weren't needed was how simple positions became complicated ones. She had learned that early. A clear no, repeated steadily, was harder to work around than a no surrounded by explanation because explanations had edges that could be pushed against. A flat no had no edges. On her secondary screen she was watching the deployment tracking feed that Earth Command had opened the moment Tom's authorization went through. She wasn't watching it constantly, her attention stayed on her scanner and her channel with the Heron commander. But she checked it. Regularly. The way you checked something that mattered without letting the checking become a distraction from the thing that mattered more right now. The feed showed movement. She couldn't see the full picture from her position and the feed didn't give her details beyond the confirmation that assets were in motion and on timeline. That was enough. She had done the math on the window she needed to hold and the feed was telling her the window would be met. She went back to watching her scanner and saying no. At 38 minutes and 40 seconds the scanner registered the first jump signature. Not at one point. At multiple points simultaneously. A spread of jump exits distributed around the Heron formation in a pattern that Kay recognized from the deployment manuals she had studied during her training at Earth Command. She had read about this configuration. Had understood its purpose theoretically. Seeing it appear on her scanner in real time was a different experience from reading about it. The formation that came through those jump points was not arranged the way standard military deployments were arranged. There was no central mass with flanking elements. No clear command vessel positioned at the rear. What emerged from the multiple jump points came in already positioned, each element arriving exactly where it needed to be, the whole arrangement complete before the last vessel had finished its exit from jump space. The Heron formation was surrounded before their own scanners had finished processing that anything had arrived. Kay watched this happen and felt something she didn't reach for a word for immediately. Something quiet and solid that sat under the professional focus she had been maintaining for 40 minutes. It wasn't relief exactly. It was the feeling of something that had been held very carefully for a long time being held by more hands. She kept her position. Her job wasn't done until it was done. The channel that opened across every frequency in the Mira system did so without announcement or buildup. One moment there was the ongoing background of open channels and scanner frequencies and the quiet electronic texture of active space. The next moment a voice was in all of it simultaneously. Kay knew the voice. Most people who had spent any time in Earth Command knew it. Admiral Pete Ross had been in Earth's military for 34 years. He was not a man known for long speeches or dramatic language. He was known for the quality that the people who had worked with him most closely described in almost identical terms regardless of when or where they had served with him. He said what he meant. He meant what he said. And the gap between those two things was zero. He said 3 sentences. Kay heard them. The Heron commander heard them. Every vessel in the Mira system heard them on every frequency at the same time in a transmission that was logged and time-stamped and would exist in the official record for as long as the official record existed. The first sentence identified who was speaking and on whose authority. The second sentence described the situation as Earth Command understood it, an unauthorized incursion into a protected system by a party that had been formally warned 6 times over 3 years, and stated clearly that the incursion was not something Earth was prepared to accept. The third sentence was the short one. The one that Kay, listening in her single patrol vessel between the Heron fleet and the planet she had been holding position to protect for 40 minutes, thought she would remember for the rest of her life not because of what it said but because of the complete absence of anything uncertain in the way it was said. Pete Ross told the Heron fleet to power down their systems. All of them. Immediately. He did not say what would happen if they didn't. He didn't need to. The thing about a voice that had zero gap between what it said and what it meant was that the things it didn't say carried the same weight as the things it did. The Heron commander could look at his scanner. Could see what had come through those jump points and where it was positioned and what it represented in terms of the calculation he now had to make. The first Heron vessel began powering down at 4 minutes after Pete's transmission ended. By 9 minutes the entire fleet had followed. 30 ships. Powered down. Sitting still in the Mira system in the configuration they had arrived in, going nowhere, doing nothing, surrounded completely on all sides by an Earth deployment that had come out of jump space already in position and had not fired a single thing and had not needed to. Kay let out a slow breath. She hadn't realized she'd been holding part of it. She looked out her viewport at the planet turning slowly below her. Same as it had been for the whole 40 minutes plus. Quiet. Unhurried. Still completely unaware of what had just happened in the space above it. She thought about the people down there waking up on a Tuesday. Going about whatever Tuesday meant for them. Living their lives in the quiet ordinary way that people lived their lives when nothing was threatening those lives. She thought about how close the margin had been. 1 patrol vessel. 40 minutes. A lot of no's said steadily into an open channel. Then she picked up her radio and reported her status to Earth Command in the flat professional tone that the situation now called for. Position holding. Heron fleet powered down. System secure. She sent it. Then she sat back in her seat and looked at the stars and thought that sometimes the most important thing you could do was simply refuse to move. The Heron withdrawal began 4 days after the Mira system incident. Nobody announced it. Nobody from the Heron Collective sent a formal communication to Earth Command or the Galactic Council saying that a withdrawal was underway. The first indication was a monitoring report from one of the outer system patrol stations noting that Heron vessels in the Kala system had reversed course and were moving outward. Then a similar report from the Devon system. Then 2 more within the same 12-hour window from stations further along the outer cluster. Tom Wade read the reports at his desk the same way he read everything, carefully, completely, without immediate reaction. Then he leaned back in his chair and looked at the ceiling for a moment. He had expected negotiation. That was the normal shape of these things, some kind of back-channel communication, a request to discuss terms, a process that took weeks and produced an agreement that both sides could present to their respective audiences as something. He had prepared for that. Had thought through the parameters of what Earth would and wouldn't accept and where the conversations would likely need to go. The Heron didn't open a back channel. They just left. System by system, over the course of 30 days, every Heron presence in the outer cluster withdrew. Not strategically, not pulling back to secondary positions or consolidating into defensible arrangements. Just leaving. Completely and without apparent interest in preserving any foothold in the region they had spent 4 years carefully, methodically expanding into. On the 28th day a formal document arrived through official council channels. No covering letter. No diplomatic preamble. Just the document, a Heron collective acknowledgement of Earth's protection claims over 14 named outer systems, signed and sealed and formatted according to council legal standards as if it had been prepared by people who wanted the paperwork to be correct even if they had nothing further to say about the matter. Tom filed it. Sent a one-line acknowledgement. And went back to work. Greg Hall heard about the withdrawal through a former colleague who was still active in the diplomatic service and called him on a Thursday afternoon to tell him what was happening. Greg was at home. He had retired the week after the mirror system incident, not because of it exactly, more because the incident had represented the conclusion of the thing he had been working on for 3 years and he had looked at what came after it and decided that after was a good time to stop. 20 years was a complete arc. He had done what he came to do. He listened to his colleague's account of the withdrawal. The systems. The timeline. The document that had arrived without a covering letter. When his colleague finished, Greg was quiet for a moment. Good, he said. His colleague waited for more. More didn't come. They talked for a few more minutes about other things and then said goodbye and Greg set the phone down and sat in the quiet of his house and thought about 6 meetings over 3 years. About the same message delivered the same way 6 times and received and acknowledged and set aside. About walking out of that 6th room and saying the last thing he had needed to say. He had meant it when he said it. He had always meant everything he said. That was what 20 years of doing the job properly had built into him. Not the inability to feel the weight of things but the ability to carry the weight without letting it affect the accuracy of what you said and did. He looked out the window. Ordinary Thursday afternoon. Quiet street. He thought about the people going home to the systems they had been displaced from. Packing up wherever they had been living in the interim. Making the trip back to places they had been born in or built or simply chosen as the place their lives were supposed to be. He didn't know their names. Didn't know what their homes looked like or what returning to them would mean specifically for each of them. He knew it mattered. That was enough. Greg Hall picked up his book and went back to reading. Kay Brooks got the commendation on a Friday. It came in the standard format, official document, appropriate language, signatures in the right places. Her commanding officer presented it to her in a brief and genuine ceremony that lasted about 4 minutes because Kay had told him in advance that she would prefer something brief and genuine over something long and formal, and he had respected that. She said thank you. Shook his hand. Took the document back to her quarters. She looked at it for a moment. Read it through once. Then she folded it carefully and put it in the drawer of her small desk next to a few other things she kept there. A photograph, a letter from her mother, a coin from her first posting that she had carried for no particular reason except that it had been in her pocket on a day that mattered and she had never taken it out. She closed the drawer. Then she went back to work because there were 3 more systems on her patrol rotation and the route didn't run itself. The note was added to the Galactic Council's new member orientation package 6 weeks after the Mirror System incident. It wasn't a policy document or a formal resolution. It wasn't the result of a committee or a vote or any of the official processes the Council used to produce official things. It was added quietly by someone in the Records Division whose name nobody thought to ask, in the section of the orientation package that covered practical guidance for new member civilizations navigating their relationship with existing members. The section already contained advice about diplomatic protocols and communication standards and the correct channels for raising various kinds of concerns. Useful practical information assembled over decades of the Council operating and learning from its own experience. The note at the end of the section was short. It said, member civilizations are advised that communication styles vary significantly across species and cultures. Some members express concern loudly and visibly. Others express it quietly and once. New members are encouraged to familiarize themselves with the communication patterns of established members before drawing conclusions about the meaning of any particular statement. Then below that, in the same plain text, with no special formatting or emphasis, a single line that had clearly been added separately from the rest of the section. A line that had the quality of something someone had decided simply needed to be there. It said, "When a human tells you something is the last time, it is the last time." No author credited. No source cited. No explanation of where it came from or what specific event had prompted its inclusion. It didn't need one. Every new member civilization that went through the orientation package read it. Most of them read it twice. Some of them asked their orientation advisors about it, and the advisors gave a version of the same answer in different words. There had been a situation. In an outer system. On a Tuesday. A single Earth lieutenant had held position between a fleet of 30 ships and a planet that had no one else. A director had opened a desk drawer. An admiral had said 3 sentences. And a collective that had spent 4 years testing the edges of human patience had discovered, in the span of 30 days, that the edges were real and that what was behind them was realer still. The universe kept moving. New civilizations joined the council. New situations developed and were managed and resolved in the slow ongoing way that a community of species living in the same galaxy managed and resolved things. But the note stayed in the orientation package. Because some things once learned were worth making sure everyone knew before they needed to find out the hard way.